Can you hear me? I think so. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to this session. I'm very excited to introduce Adam, who is an award-winning science journalist and broadcaster, also a YouTuber, which is quite unusual for a person with a PhD in atmospheric physics from Oxford University. So Adam launched his Climate Adam channel while doing his PhD about 10 years ago, and you're about to launch your 200th video this afternoon.
Yeah, hopefully this afternoon, yeah.
Fingers crossed. So I'm really keen to talk about, we both come from a scientific background, we both work in translating complex concepts into engaging content for a mainstream audience. I work directly with academics at The Conversation in the UK, and there's a real art to it, isn't there? There's a real knack to trying to get the science out of the academic silos. And what I'm really interested in is how do we bridge that gap? What are the ways that you do that with your YouTube videos in terms of condensing the facts, but not presenting them in a boring way, not losing the meaning of words, but not overloading people with jargon?
Yeah, I mean, I've always thought of the bridge over this gap as something like a tightrope, or several different tightropes in parallel. So the first of those tightropes is, as you say, trying to condense information into a form that is not only easy to understand, but it's also engaging, and it's also true to the science, and also short enough to keep people's attention. But then, at the same time, this isn't just scientific content, it's climate content, it's incredibly politicized content. And so then you're walking the tightrope of trying to put out accurate information while trying to foresee the climate misinformation that people might spread in result to that, and the climate disinformation people might spread in result to that. At the same time as that, you're very aware, when you're on YouTube, you know you're interacting with your audiences, and you see that a lot of people, especially a lot of young people, are incredibly anxious, some even suicidal, about climate change. And so then you're walking the tightrope of trying to alert people while avoiding misinformation, while making videos engaging, while making them accurate to the science, while not activating people so much that you're actually risking some kind of mental health crisis.
And there's something really important about speaking in your audience's language, which is what we journalists all do. But for YouTube, that's slightly different, I think. And being able to meet people where they're at is quite an art when you're doing it through video, I suppose, but doing it on that social media platform. Have you got any tips to share for people in terms of tricks of the trade for YouTube videos in terms of how to do that and how to convey things in that way?
I think a big part of meeting people where they're at is allowing them to meet you. So not anymore seeing it as a one-way, I'm the broadcaster, I'm going to speak, and then the audience is going to passively listen. Treating it as more of a dialogue. Obviously, you have a stage, you have a platform when you're on YouTube or when you're on Instagram. But if you just think of the upload point as the final point of the video, as the final point of the process, then you're not really meeting anyone. But if instead you respond to comments, you make videos based on those comments, you actually treat the entire process of the channel, the entire process of creation, as a part of that meeting and a part of that conversation, I think that can be really constructive. The other, for me, key to that is to really, I mean, it sounds so obvious, but absorb lots of other content from the platform, especially content which is not scientific and not journalistic content. Look at how people are making videos about fashion, about art, about all the other things you might personally be interested in, and look at the styles and the norms of those videos, and then in the kindest way possible, steal and reappropriate those to do journalism and to do scientific education.
So I think a lot of your videos are quite fun, even though they're talking about quite heavy, serious climate science. And if you haven't watched any, do head over to the Climate Adam YouTube channel.
Like, comment, and subscribe.
Hit the subscribe button. But I've lost what I was saying now.
Oh, sorry.
You've distracted me.
Point, right? But about humor in the channel, and
so you're talking about looking at that YouTube ecosystem and what works for different audiences, and you do bring a lot of fun into your pieces. also a lot of imagery and they feel very dynamic. They're not a kind of talking head, like, yes, you're talking and you're in the shot, but it's punchy, it's fast-paced. Even if the videos are maybe 10, 15 minutes long, it's quite, it's active, isn't it? You've got to keep that audience with you the whole time because people's attention spans are so short these days. Are you constantly thinking about what you can use, what tools you can use when you're editing?
Yeah, and a lot of that is through quite a selfish lens. I suppose I really do think if this were a video, I'm a climate change nerd. I spend a lot of my time thinking about climate change, but I try and think, if I didn't care about climate change and I just stumbled across this video, what would be the things which would keep me watching regardless? What would be the hook that at the beginning would make me realize, okay, there's going to be something in this for me? And then throughout, how do I keep that pace up and that sense of momentum going? And then a lot of that as well is, it is a very heavy topic, and I think bringing some lightness into that is really important. Now, that is one of the other balancing acts, because it's really important that the humor or lightness is pointed at the right place. I never want to imply that climate change itself is a funny or a light topic, but I can definitely make fun of myself. I can make fun of a lot of the people who failed to act on climate change. There are a lot of sources of humor, but it's important that they're focused in the right places, I think.
And balancing that humor with the science, with the fact, is really, really hard, isn't it? So we both work in the same world in a way. Like, we are basing all of our work on scientific, academic research. We follow the evidence, and we're producing content in different ways. But there's still a huge amount of rigor and integrity to everything that we both do. Social media, anybody can produce anything on YouTube, right? So how do you bring that journalistic aspect into your work, and how do you make that obvious to people who are looking at YouTube content that could be made by anybody?
So there are a couple of things. One I didn't do for a while because I found it honestly too cringe, which was to say my own credentials. So near the beginning of every video, I situate myself. I explain that I have a PhD in climate science, in atmospheric physics, actually, which I don't know whether this is just a British thing, but it feels like really uncomfortable to toot your own horn like that. Another thing is, even so, there are often topics where I'm not expert or I haven't done a lot of reading, and I will do a lot of reading in the lead up to a video, but obviously you're always worried as a reporter or as a scientist that you've missed something important. Luckily, as a climate scientist and as a journalist, I have a big network of contacts, and if I don't know what the right answer is, I know people who will know the right answer, and so I go out there and do reporting, and that's something I share with the audience as well. I'll say at the beginning, to make sure I did this right, I reached out to these 3 experts on 1.5 degrees. You can follow them on Twitter over here, and I think that serves a couple of functions. Firstly, it gives the video a bit of legitimacy, but secondly, I think it helps people understand the process behind it. It helps humanize the process behind it. And hopefully as well, it gives people, more people to follow, more people to learn about climate change from.
But from a journalism perspective, I guess part of it is the art of knowing which expert to ask, right? So you're kind of working out who to contact, who to speak to, who to sort of showcase in your own videos. And I guess there's a kind of integrity test with that as well, in terms of you've got to check the sources and make sure that you're following the right evidence, I suppose, as with any reporting that we do.
Yeah, and for that, I think that's really, so we've not really spoken about it, but the other half of my job is as a conventional journalist. So I work as a freelance journalist, primarily for scientific publications, for example, for Nature, for Scientific American. I've done some work for Deutsche Welle. And so through that, I really feel like that's honed that skill of knowing how many sources to ask, which sources to ask, how much balance you need for depending on the topic. But you're right, that absolutely is a skill that's invaluable and that I didn't fully get just from my academic training.
And you mentioned misinformation before. So social media is obviously, especially with climate, is flooded with misinformation, which is inadvertent false news, and disinformation when it's actually deliberate. How has your mission to tackle that misinformation and disinformation changed or shifted over the last 10 years since you started doing these videos?
I think at the beginning it was absolutely the focus. So when I started making videos, yeah, it felt like, at least in the UK, it's probably different in everyone's countries, but at least in the UK, when climate change was discussed, it was when climate change was discussed in public, that discussion was about whether it was happening or not, or whether it was human-caused or not, even though the discussion within climate science looked nothing like that. And so my videos were really trying to bridge that particular gap at first. I would say now that's much less the focus of my work. If I talk about or misinformation, it's much more to help explain to people how that operates so they can spot it better and how they can respond to it better. At the same time, it's always in the back of my mind. If I'm making a video about a particular topic, I'm aware of the mis and disinformation that circulates around that topic. And while I might not name that, I might say some things which will kind of silently be responding to those points. I see much more the role now of my channel, rather than to try and convince people who've come across mis or disinformation, to be reaching the huge number of people who already care about climate change, but they're not very engaged for some reason. They care, but they don't know enough. They care, but they don't understand how climate change relates to their lives or how their actions relate to the solutions. And I don't know whether it's just for my own sanity or not, but it feels a lot more productive to try and reach out to that audience than the kind of what seems like a much more impossible task of trying to convince people who are already convinced of the opposite.
And I guess also empowering people as well with the right information. So you mentioned solutions. I know there's a lot of solutions-focused journalists sitting in this room today. I can see you all. Where do you draw the line? So obviously, do you actively try and present solutions and systemic change and examples of progress? Because you mentioned about not wanting to trigger anxiety, not wanting to focus on doom and gloom, but obviously the ultimate solution is to come off fossil fuels. That's the kind of only option, really. Where do you sit with solutions? Is it a conscious choice sometimes when you're making a video, or do you sometimes feel torn that actually we need to show the hard-hitting news and this is the priority?
I think it depends on the video and it depends on the topic, but there are times when the focus of a topic is something really bad. It's something really scary. And I don't want to make a video or podcast or whatever I end up making where it's just like, hey, look, here's something scary. Okay, see ya, good luck with that information. Even if that's the focus of the video, I'll spend a minute or two at the end really explaining all the things that can and are counteracting that. And that is not necessarily to tell people what to do. I don't see that as my role as a journalist or a communicator. I would see that more as an activist role, although everyone draws the line a bit differently. But yeah, I think if you just present people with the negative, it disempowers people. It makes people feel helpless, and there are already so many people who feel so helpless and they're struggling with their mental health because of climate change. And so it's really important, also from a journalistic perspective, to explain that that's not the end of the story, that there are these things that respond to what I've spoken about in the rest of the video.
And when you've got a short form video, you've got a time limit, how hard is it to make space for nuance in those stories in terms of showing the full picture? You're trying to keep the jargon simple, you're trying to talk in your audience's language, you're trying to do all the things we've just spoken about, but obviously it's a really complicated story, and you don't want to lose that nuance, I guess. How do you convey that?
I think on YouTube it's become a lot easier because audiences have become a lot more used to watching videos which are 10, 20, half an hour long, hours long even in some cases. I don't make videos that long, but at least in that format, it's a lot easier to get at least the level of nuance that I feel comfortable with. But then if you're making something for vertical video, for TikTok, for Instagram, for YouTube Shorts, gosh, it's really difficult. And what I then try and do is what I think a lot of journalists try and do is I sort of think, what would the headline of this piece of work be? What would the title of it be? You know, what is the one message that I would want someone to get across from this? And then I really try and communicate that message, that one single message, as truthfully, as accurately as I possibly can, and say goodbye to as many of the side messages as possible so that I can just really be as true to one single message as possible. Which helps a lot because, you know, when you're making something longer, you think, okay, well, I need to say this about 1.5 degrees and that. But yeah.
And I guess that's where your sort of feedback loop comes in terms of your constant interaction with your audience. You can respond to their comments, you can produce a different video, you can change how you're doing things and evolve it. And so that kind of, you can constantly look at the impact you're having, perhaps more directly than written content, maybe.
Yeah, definitely. If I make something which is inadvertently misleading, I will know about it because I'll see people getting the wrong end of the stick about it. Or if I see something which opens up new questions for people, then that's really inspirational for me to work on a new video. Like right now, for example, I know that a lot of people are really, really concerned about the extreme global temperatures of the last couple of years, and a couple of climate scientists have come out and said, we don't know why this is happening. And I see comments again and again saying, you know, what's going on, what do we need to know? Now that is going to be a really tricky video, but it's going to be, I hope, a really good video because it will be explaining not just the science, but the scientific method, how science happens when we don't know the answer yet. And I don't know if it would have occurred to me to make a video about that if I wasn't getting comments time and time again. But I'm really happy I've got those comments, and I'm really excited to make those videos.
Is there any one video that you're particularly proud of?
Yes, there's one video which is slightly from an older era of the channel, but I still feel very affectionate about it. It's about the question whether it's too late to stop climate change. And in this video, I use different visual metaphors to talk about how we talk about climate change, and I act them out. So I say normally when we think about a limit, like the 2-degree limit or the 1.5-degree limit, we think of a bomb that's going to go off. But that's not how climate change works. Climate change is more like getting punched in the face. And no matter how long we've been punching ourselves in the face, it's never too late to stop. And I explain this by punching myself in the face.
I remember that one.
And partly I just think it's a helpful visual metaphor, and partly it just looked so good once I added the punching sound effects to it. So yeah, I think that's my proudest video.
And how long does it take to make one of these videos? Maybe it's how long is a piece of string, but it's not a kind of quick thing you bodge together in a day. It's a lot of effort, isn't it? Editing and...
I mean, it's similar to, I guess, everyone's journalistic experience. You know, sometimes you're reporting on something which is breaking news, and then perfect is the enemy of the good, and good is the enemy of the done. You just want to get it out there as quickly as possible, because otherwise people aren't going to read it, they're not going to watch it. So, for example, if there's a new intergovernmental panel on climate change talk, it's really important I put the video out within 24 hours of that. But if there's no deadline, I would say it's about a week's work from conception to researching, and I'm a one-person team, so that week's work is my week's work.
And you're doing every stage of that process yourself?
Yeah, these days, yeah.
I'm very conscious of time, and we're going to have to wrap up in a sec. So if you have questions, feel free to come and chat to us at the end. Just to conclude, what's the most surprising insight that you have come away from your YouTube work with? Is there anything that you kind of have learnt and would never have imagined you've kind of experienced from this?
Yeah, I think when I started, the question was really, how do we get people to talk about climate change? Which was, about a decade ago. And what's really surprised me is within that time, that's changed completely. Now, a huge amount of people want to talk about climate change. They want to know what they can do about climate change. And they're looking for more people with expertise or with journalistic integrity to help them understand climate change. And that's honestly one of the things that keeps me doing this, because it's just wonderful to see what used to be kind of shouting against a brick wall now feels actually, there are people out there who are shouting back.
Yes, people do appreciate it, and
Exactly.
yeah, they've got the right signposts.
Yeah, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Adam.
Thank you, Anna.
Thank you very much. I think that was bang on, wasn't it?
Yeah, I thought we were like halfway through.
No,
So
I kept looking,
fast.
and I was like, 25 minutes, 25 minutes.
Wow. Was that okay for you?
That was good, yeah.
Thank you.
Are
You let
happy?
me through a beautiful.